Hi everybody, this is Dave Thomas, and today I am building the black Brant IIIB model rocket by Rocketarium. This is a scale model of a Canadian-built rocket, and versions of this are still in use today by both the Canadian and American space agencies. The first thing for us to do is to make sure that we have all of the correct parts here. So we have a body tube, and then two very short body tubes, a nose cone, a coupler, parachute, ejection baffle kit, motor mount kit, and then also a small parts bag here that contains the fins, some trim pieces, launch lug, a bulk plate and screw eye, and a shock cord. Okay, and then we have a 3D printed nozzle assembly here. Okay, we have some water slide decals, and then two vinyl decals. Alright, and by this you can tell this is the American version of the rocket. And then we have two balsa sticks here. The longer one can be used for gluing. The shorter one is used for as a spacer to properly place the baffle. And so it looks like we've got everything here, so I'll put this back away and we will start in on the build. So the first thing in the instructions is to build the motor mount. So we've got an 18mm motor mount tube, and hidden inside of that is a spacer tube that we'll need here. So go ahead and pull that out. Okay, and the first thing to do is to apply a bead of glue approximately 3/4 of an inch inside one end of the motor mount tube. Now it doesn't matter which end you use, but that end will become the forward end. Alright, I'm just going to use a finger here to spread that around inside there. Okay, so we get something like that. And then I'm going to take the thrust ring or engine block here. Oops, actually I must get more of that down inside there. There we go. Now I'll take the thrust ring, I'm going to put that in the aft end, add the spacer, and now just push it down flat. And what you should see is glue being pushed forward into the thrust ring there, just like it did. Okay, immediately remove this so it doesn't accidentally get glued in. Okay, next thing we need to do is make a couple of marks here. Alright, now I'm going to mark the aft end of this so I don't get it confused later. Okay, so we need one mark that is 3/4 of an inch or 19mm from the forward end. So it's going to be right there. Okay, and then another mark that is 1 inch from the aft end, or 25mm for the metrically inclined. Alright, and so on the forward end, I'm just going to cut a little notch here. And if everything is lined up appropriately, this should be just above the thrust ring there. And I'm looking at this and thinking, no, that's not going to go. Let me make sure I've got all my stuff done right. Oh, okay, that's just a marking. And then we're going to cut a slit here, 2 3/4 inches from the aft end. So right, a sloppy mark there. Okay, now here I'm just going to cut a little slit with my hobby knife, and this should come out right there, right above the ring, which it does. So make this about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch wide, and then the right angle end of the engine hook will just fit right in there. So I'm just going to pop that in. Okay, so it should look like that. Okay, next we're going to add the centering rings, and these will slide on here to begin with. I'm just going to dry fit these. And so they're meant to go on the insides of the 2 lines that we drew earlier, like this. Alright, and then we will have a sleeve here that will eventually fit over these. And so if you've got your rings in the right place, that sleeve should match up just like that. Now, it turns out that in some earlier kits, there is a typo here where it says to put them on the outside. And if you had dutifully followed directions, like I always tell you to, you'd come up with one that looks like this. Okay, and the coupler or the sleeve here won't fit in place. If you did this, you are not lost. What you can do is simply cut approximately 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch, just make a ring here, and put that on top of the 2 centering rings. Okay, and I'll show you how to do that here after I finish the mount as it should be correctly installed. Okay, so here, now that I've got it dry fit and I know it's supposed to go in where it is, I'm going to back these rings off. Okay, and then we're just going to apply some glue to the inner edge here. Okay, I'll just smooth that around first. And I'm just going to push this till we get back to that mark. A little more. There it is. Alright, and I'm going to do the same thing here. In fact, I'll use up some of this excess glue. Alright, and we'll put some around the inside edge of the aft ring. Alright, now I'll move that one up until I find my line again, right there. Okay, and remove any excess glue there. Okay, and then I'm going to put some glue here on the outside surface, and actually here I'm going to use, instead of my usual fairly fast setup wood glue here, I'm going to use some slow setting glue. This is another wood glue in my case, but you could also use white glue at this step. And this is just to keep it from grabbing quite so quickly so that I can adjust it as needed. Okay, so first I'm going to put this on and slide that over. And this is why I'm using the slower set time glues. If I do this with the fast setting glue, it may grab too early before I want it to. All right, I'm just going to push that down. Okay, and over. Alright, and I want that flush there. Alright, get any excess glue off. Okay, and now I'm going to let that dry. Now, if you have the older version of the instructions that told you to put the rings on the outer parts of the two marks, you can fix this. So what I'm going to do here is just place my sleeve over the first centering ring there, forward centering ring. And I'm just going to use that to brace the cardboard here, and I'm just going to cut around it. Okay, and actually once I've got it started, I don't need that anymore. You don't have to be exact, perfectly straight here. All we're doing is increasing the thickness and then you can do the same thing for the other centering ring. I'm just using the same ring here. And what I'm doing is using the two edges of that sleeve tube here. So I'll have one straight edge that I can use for lining up. And now what I'll do here is glue these in place. Okay, so the forward sleeve there, doesn't matter which way you really put it on there. And here, since I'm not trying to do two rings at once, I can go ahead and use the regular wood glue. I'm just going to kind of squish it all the way around here, as we do want a good adhesion between the centering rings and the sleeve, because the sleeve now is going to be taking the force from the centering rings. Alright, and then we'll do the same thing back here. Alright, and here I do want the nice square edge to be facing the aft end. That way we've got a nice clean edge right there. This doesn't make that much of a difference since this will be up inside the body tube. Okay, and I'll go ahead and let that one dry as well. While our engine mount glue is drying, we can move forward to the baffle. And this is Rocketarium's BT50 ejection baffle kit. This comes with their appropriate size kits, but also you can buy this separately to put into your own rockets. So this has its own instruction set and everything. I'll just open this up. Alright, if you've ever worked with any of their other baffles, this is pretty much on the same principle, except this being smaller, it doesn't use holes all the way around these discs that are offset by diameter. Instead, these will be offset by side. Okay, so we're just going to open this guy up. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is take the screw eye here and screw it in. Okay, now this has got just a little bit of a taper, it looks like. So this is going to go in this way, so that the tapered edge should be facing in, and the screw eye should go on the outside, on the larger side of that tapered edge. Alright, once you've got that there, then we're just going to put a little dab of glue on. Alright, then I'm going to screw that back in. I'm going to do so until I get just to the point where there's like one turn of threads left there. And then I'll put a little glue on the other side here. And this is just to help lock it into place. Doesn't have to be pretty. Okay, and while that's setting up a little bit here, we will go ahead and put the other baffle plate in. And here I'm going to use an applicator for this. Okay, so just put a ring of glue, fairly thick, because this is going to have quite a bit of pressure behind it. Right, just right inside the edge there. And then, again, look for the taper here. The taper should face inward on the narrow side. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of squeeze that in, just like that. Okay, and then we can do the same thing for the other end. That. Okay, now the key thing here is that the baffle plates should be opposite each other. So the holes are on this side for this end, so I want the holes on this side on the opposite. Okay, and then go ahead, push that in till it's flush. If you go too far like I just did there, you can simply pull it back out a little bit. Okay, and I'm just going to let this whole assembly dry before we do anything else with it. The next part of our instructions show how to assemble the nose cone and the fake payload bay. Okay, so the original rocket had a small payload bay that included the nose. In the model here, this is not actually used as a payload bay. Something to consider before you assemble this is how much treatment you want to give the nose cone here. So you can see there are seams here from the plastic mold And they've got some raised ridges as well as some depressed areas here. At minimum, I suggest that you at least lightly sand the entire nose cone with some 220 to 400 grit sandpaper, simply because it will help the paint adhere better. Now if you want to go beyond that, you can also fill in these grooves here with either some plastic model putty or possibly some wood filler, although I would go with the plastic model putty first if you've got it. And then you apply that, let it harden, and then sand it off. And that will help smooth out these seams here. Okay. Regardless of what you do, once you've got your nose cone treated, then you'll take one of the short tubes here, and that's going to go all the way up here. Now the instructions indicate using a heavy bead of wood glue. And here again, this is a good place to sand things. So I would sand this with some coarse or medium sandpaper, say in the range of 60 to 100 grit. And that will give the glue something to lock onto. Alright, now once that's in place, then you'll also have this coupler here, and that's going to insert right behind it. So you can see the shoulder of the nose cone comes down fairly far, and this should rest up against it. Now, when you go to glue this, I would also recommend putting some glue in here to allow it to flow in and go through the eyelet here. And that way when the glue hardens, it will lock the nose cone in place. Okay? So if you're not going to do anything to your nose cone, you can go ahead and just skip a few minutes here and go to the gluing step of this. I am going to do some fairly extensive preparation of my nose cone here. Now since I do want to prep this for some plastic model putty to fill in this groove here, I'm going to start initially with some 150 grit sandpaper to knock down the ridge along here on both sides. Okay, so that's knocked down the big peaks there. And now I'm going to go to a finer grain. Here, I'm going to use some 320, and I'm going to use that all the way around the nose cone. 220 will work for this step as well, if you don't have the finer grit. Okay, and while I'm doing it then, I'm also going to sand the shoulder, as I mentioned earlier. So I've got some 100 here. And all I want to do is roughen this up. I really don't want to decrease the diameter very much. I just need something for the glue to hang on to. Okay. Now you can wipe this down with a tissue or paper towel. I use a little bit of rubbing alcohol on it. You can just use water or you can do it dry. We just want to get rid of all the sanding dust here. Okay, and then to fill in the grooves here that are left behind, I'm going to use some Testors plastic model putty. There are actually several brands out there of essentially the same thing. This is just the one I happen to have. Alright, and I'm just going to run a bead of this along that seam. Alright, and put some extra there where that big gap is along here. And you want to work with this fairly quickly, and I'm just going to smooth it in all along the length there. Okay, this will start drying right away, so you don't want to do too much to it, or it'll start clumping up. Alright, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side here. So again, right along the seam. Looks like this is almost the end of this tube. Okay, and now I'm going to let this dry for about an hour and come back and sand it, and then we'll be ready to put the whole thing together there. While I'm waiting for the nose prep to finish, I'm going to go ahead and assemble the back part of the nose cone assembly here. And so we've got a bulkhead plate here, and this needs to have a screw eye put into it. And we'll do this in the same way that we did for the baffle mount. Okay, so we're just going to take a little dab of glue here. Alright, and then I'm going to screw this in. Now if you want to, you can screw it in to begin with and then back it back out. I found it doesn't make a whole lot of difference and just saves a step this way. Okay, so just like before, I'm going to thread this in until only about 1 turn's worth of threads are left on this upper side. And once again, I'll lock the screw in place with a little bit of glue. There we go. Alright, and then we'll let that dry for a few minutes so it doesn't run. And now that the glue is set a little bit, it's still wet there, but we can work with it. I'm going to put a heavy bead of glue right on the inside here of the aft end of the nose cone coupler. Okay, and then I'm just going to push this in. I'll actually go forward a little bit and then come back. Give a little bit of a twist there, and that's just to get a good coating of glue all the way around that. Okay, and I'm going to let that dry, and if you wish, you can go ahead and put a fillet of glue around here, especially if you didn't get a really heavy bead in there. Okay, so I'm going to let this part dry as well. The next several steps in the instructions have to do with the preparation and mounting of the fins. And so here you'll need to decide if you're going to do any type of sealing or filling of the fins, or if you're just going to use them just as they are outside of the package. Now, if you want to go the completely scale look with these, all of the leading and tip and trailing edges need to be tapered. And there is a tapering guide on the back page of the instructions. Okay, and if you're going to do the tapers, do that at this point. If you don't want the full tapers, then you just need to round the leading edges here, and then everything else can either be rounded or left square. But we also have these little guys here. Okay, on the actual rocket, these are braces for the fins. In the model, they're just trim pieces. And you'll want to attach these to the fins before you do any type of sealing to them, but after you've done whatever airfoiling you want to do. Now personally, I'm just going to round the fins, mainly because it keeps them stronger. Alright, so here you can start with some medium grit sandpaper. I've got 100 grit here. And just sand the edge corners back and forth here to start with. And then as you make inroad with that, you can start turning it over. So you just kind of round over like this. And then check them periodically. in cross section to see that they're even, and right now mine is not. Okay, it's a little more even on this side, and so then you can adjust the pressure and taper that you're holding the sandpaper at. Okay, so now when we look at these in cross section, it's still a little bit off, but it's not too bad. Alright, and then you can just give it a quick sand here on the edges. Okay, and don't forget the root edge. Now if you're tapering everything, make sure the root edge is still square. You don't want any taper on that. Okay, and then once you've got it shaped the way you want to, go ahead and sand the surfaces. And always remember to sand with the grain. Okay, so this fin is finished from a sanding point of view. I'm going to go ahead and use sanding sealer on these, and so I'm going to take and finish my sanding job off camera, and then the next thing we'll do is shape and apply the little mount brackets here. Now I have my fins sanded, and these little fin supports here are going to go on the root edge at 5 millimeters from the aft edge of the root edge. That made sense? Okay, so they're going to go on roughly like this. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is mark each fin on both sides 5 millimeters from that corner there. So it's going to be right here. And then if I turn this over, it'll be right here. All right, and I need to do that on all 3 fins. Okay, so we've got a little mark on each one of these. Now the instructions call for us to sand these so that the top edge, so let's see here, if I put this down where it's supposed to be here, okay, then this entire top edge here should be tapered till it goes right into the fin. Okay, and then the 2 ends should also be tapered so that they blend into the fin. Now keep in mind this is very, very thin balsa, and one of the things you could do is go ahead and glue this onto the fin first, and then using some very fine files or a sanding board or something like that, you could do the tapering afterward. I'm not quite sure which one would be better, so I'm going to start by tapering this, or at least attempting to. Okay, and again, you got to hold this really lightly. Make sure I've got the right edge tapered here. Okay, and you're going to have to taper these, half of them to the right and half to the left. and they'll go on either side of the fin. And if you do end up breaking one, or you just don't want to have to put up with all this really fine detail sanding, the Rocket will fly just fine without them. You just won't have the same level of scaled detail. Okay, now since this one's tapered in like this, it needs to go on the right side of this fin. So it'll go on like this. Now to glue this on, I'm going to use some longer setting time wood glue. You could also use white glue. You can use the shorter set wood glue as well. The reason I want the longer set stuff is it's a bit thinner, because we want just a really thin coating here so that we don't have a lot of glue oozing out of it. Okay, now I just got to make sure I find my tapered side again. Okay, and you want this flush with the root edge, or even extending just a little teeny tiny bit beyond it. And the reason I say that is we can actually sand this in a rounded shape so that it conforms to the tube better. And when you do that, these actually do a functional job. Okay, so I'm going to repeat this off camera with all of the fins doing both sides, and then we'll come back. Now I just found something that seems to work better. So this is just a disposable emery board or nail file, and I found this actually gives me a lot more control doing the tapers here. And so this is just another option if you want to try and get this detail work in. I've applied sanding sealer to all the fins, and I'm allowing those to dry. And the modeling putty on the nose cone now is ready to be sanded. Here I'm going to start with 150 grit sandpaper, and then I'll work my way up to 220 and possibly 320. Now one of the drawbacks of this stuff is it clogs up sandpaper quite a bit, so you want to make sure you've got some extra sheets with you. Okay, and this is about what we're looking for here, is that we're going to sand away most of the filler, and what gets left behind here will fill in the cracks there. So this area is pretty much done. I'm going to do a little more right here. Okay, and the same thing on this side. So you can see where it's filled in the deeper grooves there, and now we'll just smooth it out. Alright, and then depending on just how smooth you want it, you may need to go back and do a little more fill. There's still kind of a little bit of a groove right there, but I think I'm going to ignore it for now. Okay, and then once you've got it sanded the way you want to, and then just take a cloth or tissue and wipe off all of the dust. Now if you use alcohol here, be careful, it will dissolve the putty there, so you want to hit it just very briefly, just enough to get the dust off, but not pick up the putty there. Now we can go ahead and assemble the nose cone and payload bay here. So the first thing we're going to do is just put a heavy bead of glue into one of the two short white pieces. Okay, so I put this in like that. So we look inside here, and we don't want this to dry, so here we're going to put in just a little bit more glue. Like here, I'm going to go ahead and take an applicator and just kind of spread this around. And so this will glue in the coupler here. And note how I've got the glue flowing there between the two sides of that eyelet. We want that. That's going to help lock this in place. Alright, and then we take this piece and slide that in. Alright, hold that firmly there for just a few seconds. You can give it a twist back and forth to help seat it. And now we want this to completely dry before we do anything else with it. Fortunately, we don't need to do anything with it for quite a while yet. We're going to go back to mounting the fins here in just a little bit. The sanding sealer on my fins has dried, and I'll just take these off camera to sand them, because I know you guys just really don't care about watching sanding. And then once that's done, if they're still rough, you can apply another layer of sanding sealer, let it dry and sand it. I'm just going to do the one coat here for expediency if nothing else. So I'm going to sand these and then we'll be right back to put them on. I have my fins sanded, and now what I'm going to do is take the body tube and I'm going to wrap some 150 grit sandpaper around it here. And try and get this as tight as you can, because what we're trying to do is sand the curvature of the body tube into the root edge of the fins here. And this is why I left just a little fraction of a millimeter here of the braces overhanging the root edge. And so now I'm just going to hold this perpendicular and just drag it across this a few times. Okay, now the key is to keep it perpendicular, and it's trying to move a little bit. But this will give us a tighter bond between the root edge and the body tube once we go to glue these. And it will also make it so the fillets will be tighter. Okay. Next we'll need the fin marking guide, and we'll use this twice. So just go ahead and cut this out quickly. Now the first thing we're going to mark is the other short piece. So we'll need this guy here, and we'll need just a little bit of tape. Ready. Okay, so simply wrap this around. You're going to want it close to centered here. It doesn't have to be exact, but you'll need some space on both edges. Just hold that in place. Okay, and then I'm just going to go through and mark each edge. Now I'm going to lower this down so it doesn't move on the tube. Here we go. Alright, and that B line is the launch lug, so I'm just going to mark it as such. Okay, and then using a straight edge or a door frame, then go ahead and extend those lines. Just like that. Okay, and then we're going to come down to the main body tube, and we're going to do the same thing, and we'll extend those lines up about 5 inches or so. Okay, and this is mainly to help keep alignment. The launch lug itself will be mounted 5 inches up. And so you need it at least that far of a line to know where you're going. But do extend the fin lines up here a little bit as well, so it'll make it easier to align when we put the two tubes together. Next, I'm going to take some sandpaper here and just lightly sand along the fin lines. It doesn't take a lot, and all I'm doing is just taking off the glossiness there, and this will help the glue hold better. Now, if you accidentally erase your line by sanding it, you can just go back and draw it back in. And then on the body tube, the launch lug is going to go at 5 inches. Now usually this is measured from the aft end of the launch lug. This one's got it on the forward end. That's fine. Except that my line isn't quite long enough there. I'll go ahead and extend that off camera. But then in the same way, I am going to sand this. Let me get a launch lug here. Alright, so that launch lug is going to fit like there. Okay, so I'm going to sand between those two. Okay, and again, it doesn't take a whole lot of sanding for that. Now, if you look closely at the fins, there's actually a little burn mark right here that was put into the fins during the cutting process, and this is a guide. And so that is going to determine where the fin goes. So that should be right flush with the edge of the fin tube here. Alright, and then this is going to hang out just a little bit there. Okay, now to glue this will be like pretty much any other fin. So here, just take your fin and apply a thin bead of glue to it. I'm just going to smooth that out so it's nice and even. Too much glue at this stage will actually make it harder to get the fins on straight, as they won't grab as quickly. Alright, and then once more, we're going to put this on, and we really don't want a lot of glue, or any glue, past that little burn mark. Okay, so I'm just going to add that right like that, and then we'll pull it off. And we'll wait about 30 to 60 seconds here. Okay, now I'm going to reapply it to the now tacky glue. Okay, and now we need to look down and make sure that we are perpendicular and straight. That is not straight. Okay. Now, something you can do to help make sure that your fins are straight is go ahead and take the body tube and then take a coupler, or in this case I'm just using the baffle here. Now I'm just going to temporarily insert this and then insert the fin can there. Alright, now that gives me a longer line down which I can sight to help ensure that my fins are on straight. And then you can take it back off again if you like. Okay, let this dry for 10 to 15 minutes and then repeat the process with the other 3 fins. While the glue is drying on the fins, we can move on to the launch lug. And here again we'll just put a thin bead of glue here. And then the forward end is at this 5-inch mark. Okay, and then we just need to line it up along the tube and our line. Check this for both directions.